What would you do if at dawn you walked outside and found two unconscious Apache sisters, each towering over 6 feet, bleeding in your yard while a storm of riders closed in from the ridge? Would you risk your life to save them, knowing the law would call you a traitor and your neighbors a coward? Or would you shut the door and let the desert finish them? This choice would decide not just one man's fate, but the future of 2 nations. Dawn crawled over the high desert like a tired soldier, and the storm left behind a yard of broken signs, splintered fence rails, cattle staggering, the wind still tasting of iron. Ezekiel Marsh stepped out with a lantern and a prayer he no longer believed in, and saw the thing that should not be. 2 women lay in his trampled lot, half buried in mud, beadwork torn, breath ghosting in ragged wisps. Not settlers, Apache. And not ordinary Apache either, giants among their people. The smaller one, if every rule of survival said turn away. Out here, a man who sheltered Apache ended up under a cottonwood with a rope for a neck and a crowd for a sermon. Yet he could hear the cattle coughing death behind him, could see the frost-nipped pasture where his luck had dried to salt, and something in that ruin matched the terror he saw in her eyes. Not hatred, not fury. The human fear of being left. "Please, sister," the tall one rasped, the word shaped like a command that had learned humility. It hit Ezekiel like a winter nail. He remembered Elizabeth, fever-taken 3 winters back, and felt the old helplessness rise cold, certain mean. He knelt. The giant's shoulder felt like lifting a wet anvil wrapped in skin. Blood slicked his palms. Lightning far off stitched the horizon. Closer still, dust lifted off the southern ridge and hung like smoke from a slow fire. Riders. Wolves scenting a wound, he could drag them inside and damn his name. He could shut the door and let the prairie finish what the storm began. Either way, the frontier would write him into a story he could not escape. Coward or traitor, liar or dead man. The door frame was too narrow for her shoulders. The law outside was narrower still. Ezekiel made his choice in the time it takes a heart to pick a side. "On 3, he told the towering woman, and together they lifted the fallen one toward the light that waits in every threshold and toward the trouble riding down to claim them. Hoofbeats gathered like a verdict. 5 riders topped the ridge, rifles low, the posture of men who thought the ending already written. Ezekiel's rifle held 12, his pistol 6, numbers thin as grass. Inside waited needle, whiskey, gauze, and a scrap of mercy. Outside waited judgment. Prairie held its breath. Help them, be enemy. Leave them, never sleep. No rescue. 3 minutes, 2 giants, 1 soul on the line. Dawn turned blade hard. The cabin swallowed them like a fort of splinters. Ezekiel shouldered the door, lantern tilting, floorboards flexing, under the weight of a woman built like a living bastion. The doorway bit her shoulders. He turned her sideways, breath ragged, and they slid her through with inches to spare. Ayanna, the standing giant, kept pace despite the cut across her brow, hands sure as a surgeon's. On the table, needle, coarse thread, a bottle that burned like remorse. "Hold," he said, and the smaller giant Itel answered with a sound that was half growl, half prayer. He washed, he stitched, he wrapped ribs that felt carved from oak. Every pass of cloth painted his fingers darker. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, as if a jury wanted in. "Why hunted?" he asked, cutting bandage with his knife. Ayanna's jaw worked, then stilled. "Chief's son take 3 wives. Beat 2. Wants Itel 4th. She says no." The words were stones dropped into a dry well. He could not hear them hit bottom. He set the thread, breathed once, and tied off a knot. "Some things worse than dying," she added, eyes hard as obsidian. He counted ammunition, 12 in the long gun, 6 in the Colt, and pictured 5 riders cresting the southern ridge he had watched since his first winter here. As if summoned by the thought, dust unwound on that horizon, a ribbon of omen. Ayanna moved to the slit in the shutter and peered out. "They come," she said, and her hand tightened on a knife, made for war, not chores. The ranch was a lonely dot. 15 miles to a neighbor, 40 to a town that only loved its own on payday. Men had swung for less mercy than this. Ezekiel felt the rope in memory, the creak, the hush, the finality, and forced the thought away like a vulture from a calf. Itel stirred, fever bright in her eyes. In a voice roughened by pain, she tried English. No. Leave. He knelt until his gaze met hers. No, he said. Not while I have hands to lift and bullets to spare. The promise cost nothing in that moment and everything after. Hoofbeats arranged themselves into a sentence. 5 silhouettes halted on the ridge, horses blown, faces marked for war. A hand rose and pointed, sure as a verdict. Ayanna did not flinch. If they take us, she said quietly, you die also. If I hand you over, he answered, I die different. Name? She asked, as if names were tools. Ezekiel Marsh. She nodded once. Ayanna, Sister Itel. He tasted their names like iron and rain. A voice outside, Apache words, carrying the clipped cadence of command. Ayanna's reply was a whisper. They asked for the white man who saved River Girl 3 moons past. Chief Nailish swore debt. Some believe, some do not. The creek came back to him, the branches, the frightened child, the fever he watched like a fire about to run. He had left without a name, certain the right thing was best done in silence. The fist on the door shook splinters free. A second voice, this time in halting English. White man inside, come now. Ayanna's hand touched his sleeve, steady, warm, impossibly strong. You step out afraid, they smell it. You step out honest, they measure you. He set the rifle down where the sun through a crack could find it if needed, lifted the bar, and breathed once for the dead cattle, once for Elizabeth, once for the choice that had already chosen him. Then Ezekiel Marsh opened his door to judgment. At last, Ezekiel stepped into the light that made every lie look thin. 5 riders faced him, paint hard across their cheeks, rifles at a sleepy angle that could wake mean. The leader's hair was braided with gray. His eyes held a scholar's patience and a hunter's edge. I am Ezekiel Marsh, he called, voice steadier than his ribs. 3 moons passed, I pulled the chief's youngest from a creek jam and set her on the trail home. I asked, no payment. I gave no name. Silence ran out like a rope, then tightened. The gray-braided man eased his horse forward. Show yourself, he said, and bring the women. Ayanna's shadow filled the doorway before her body did, 7 feet of resolve and ceremony. Itel leaned on the jam, pale but standing, one arm to her ribs, chin high. You help those who refuse chief's son, the leader said. You choose a side. Ezekiel's answer came clean. I chose the wounded. He waited for the sky to fall. Instead, the leader turned, spoke to his men in quick, low bursts, then faced the cabin again. Chief Nailish comes at sunrise, he declared. We test your story, we wait. The longest hours of Ezekiel's life uncoiled, slow as rawhide. The riders camped beyond the fence, silhouettes against coals. In the cabin, lamplight drew a circle where law could not quite trespass. Ezekiel boiled rags, poured whiskey, stitched, and listened to the frontier breathe through every crack. Ayanna watched the windows. Itel watched him. Your chief fair, he asked. A just axe, Ayanna said, but axes must fall somewhere. The fever broke toward midnight, sweat beating Itel's temples like dew on iron. She raised her eyes. Thank you, she said carefully. For danger shared. Anyone decent would, he replied. Ayanna's mouth shaped a small, unbelieving smile. Decent is rare when fear is cheap. Coyotes sketched questions out on the hills. The tethered horses stamped at absences. Ezekiel cleaned his hands and counted cartridges again, a prayer in arithmetic. If the dawn chose peace, they might live. If it chose politics, they would become an example nailed to memory. Hoofbeats touched the edge of hearing. Not Apache. Different weight, different hunger. Ayanna's gaze sharpened. Her hand dropped to the knife that never asked permission. A voice floated from the yard, threaded with federal authority and the habit of getting its way. Marsh, Come out slow, hands high. Deputy Marshal Kane stepped where the lamplight could find his badge. Two more men ghosted to either side, guns hanging like verdicts. Reports of Apache sign, Kane said. Blood on your porch. You got hostiles inside. Ezekiel felt the truth and the lie fight in his chest. Behind the door, the giants breathed like furnaces learning restraint. He pushed his fear down where the rope memory lived. I've got wounded, he said, and the night to outlast. And I've got the law, Kane answered, thumb easing his hammer back. Step aside. Kane's man crouched at the porch stain, then the mud. Not one body, he muttered. Tracks big as barrels. Kane's eyes thinned. Move, Marsh. At sunrise, Chief Nailish comes to test a blood debt, Ezekiel said. Start this now and you'll stand in 2 wars. Hooves rolled from the north, many. Kane tilted his head. Riders, positions. The lantern guttered. Ayanna nodded. Outside, night tightened and waited. Reinforcements spilled from the dark, 4 more badges, rifles leveled. Kane's grin found teeth. Search every building, he barked. Ezekiel felt the story bend toward a gallows. If the door broke, Ayanna would meet them like a cliff. Itel would rise on pain, blood would write the floor, dawn would inherit ruin. Before a boot hit the steps, Ayanna came out, night shrinking around her height. Gasps punched the line. I am Ayanna, daughter of Chief Nailish, she said. This man gave mercy. Apache law guards him until my father speaks at sunrise. Itel followed, tall as a legend, hand on bandage, eyes iron. Kane lifted his rifle. Apache law ain't in my book. Your book signed our treaty, Ayanna said. It binds your courts to ours when our people stand judged by our law. A deputy shouted, orders from the governor. All Apache harbored by settlers to be taken over the Morrison killings. Morrison attacked us, Itel said. He would take me like cattle. I refused. Silence held. Kane's jaw worked. Words are cheap. Chains are federal. Then wait and buy truth, Ezekiel said. The chief will pay in witness. Kane chose caution and spectacle. Perimeter, he snapped. Fires rose. Horses were set. The yard hardened into a courtroom of stars and threat. Inside, hush. Ezekiel changed Itel's dressing. Ayanna paced. You could run, he said. And teach them we fear? She replied. No, we keep our word. Hours thinned. Coyotes traded news. Ezekiel's hand shook. Ayanna took one, steadying him. Breathe like mountain. The tremor left. Dawn rolled. Kane formed his men. Ezekiel stood between worlds. Ayanna lifted her chin. My father comes. Dust delivered Chief Nailish with 5 elders in paint. He dismounted, calm as water. His glance touched Kane, Ezekiel, his daughters. The yard's center moved to him. Deputy Marshal, he said, you hold my blood. Kane said, they linked to Morrison deaths. They linked to honor defended. Nailish answered, your treaty recognizes our law. Words fenced, measured, dangerous. Nailish turned to Ezekiel. 3 moons past you gave a life back to me. Tonight you guarded 2 more. Harboring fugitives. Kane cut in. Nailish raised a hand. Blood debt binds us. 3 debts coil like a rope. I set a stronger cord. Adoption. The word burned. Nailish drew a bone and silver necklace. By Apache law, I take you as my son. Under treaty, my son stands under our shield. The women you aided stand as your sisters until judgment. Kane's face went slate. A trick, a structure, Nailish replied. Yours and mine. Ayanna met Ezekiel's eyes. He felt the weight before it touched cost and cover at once. Do you accept? The chief asked. Ezekiel tasted dust and a door he had never known. I do. The necklace settled. The yard exhaled. At sunrise's end, Nailish said, I return with a final decision. He turned, elders wheeled with him. Kane lowered his rifle by inches. Ayanna brushed Ezekiel's shoulder, brief as lightning. Between burned fence and watching guns, hope improbable, stubborn took root. Ezekiel looked from badges to braids and understood the knife edge they all straddled. One promise to law, one promise to mercy, and a treaty like a narrow bridge over a canyon. Step wrong, and everyone fell. Step right, and the frontier learned a new word for courage. The dawn kept its count. The necklace hung heavy as a verdict. Ezekiel felt its weight press both shield and shackle into his collarbone. Chief Nalish's words had turned Cain's threats into smoke, yet the smoke still stung. The marshals ringed the cabin, their rifles lowered but not forgotten. The Apache warriors melted back into shadow, trusting dawn to deliver truth. Inside, lamplight painted Ayana's jaw in angles of defiance. Itel's breathing steadied, though fever still licked at her skin. Ezekiel boiled more water, hands restless. "You did not have to claim me," he whispered. Ayana's eyes found his, dark and unreadable. "My father saw more than choice. He saw proof. You risked when no one watched. That is Apache way of worth." Ezekiel stared at the floorboards, cracked with age. "Adoption makes me your brother." The word scraped his throat. He remembered Elizabeth again, fevered and gone, the word brother bleeding with loss. "It makes you shield," Ayana said, "and shield must learn weight." Outside, Cain cursed low with his men. Ezekiel caught fragments. "Governor, report, noose, if not careful." The lawmen wanted blood, wanted victory, but treaties chained them as tightly as the necklace chained him to a tribe he barely knew. The hours dragged. He fed the fire, listened to Ayana hum a song that sounded like wind over stone. Itel dozed, murmuring names in her language. Ezekiel could almost believe they would survive the night. Then, hoofbeats again. Slow, deliberate, not Apache this time, not marshals either. Lantern glow caught metal badges, different men, different law. Reinforcements Cain had summoned with secret riders, their boots hit dirt with the cold rhythm of authority. One called out, "Orders from the governor. All Apache harbored must be surrendered at dawn." Cain's relief bled into cruelty. "You hear that, Marsh? Blood debt means nothing in federal light." Ezekiel's pulse hammered. Ayana's hand fell to his arm again, grounding him. "Mourning judges more than law," she murmured. In that moment, Ezekiel realized his choice had already split the world. To settlers, he was traitor. To Apache, brother, to himself. A man who had finally drawn a line he would not step back across. The twist was clear as sunrise. This was no longer about saving two women. It was about rewriting who he was, who he belonged to, and which justice would survive the dawn. Cain strode back to the porch with a prosecutor's smile, the kind that confuses law with victory. "At dawn," he said, "I take the sisters. You can keep the trinket." He meant the bone and silver at Ezekiel's throat. Ayana's gaze cooled to winter. "That trinket binds chiefs and governors both," she said. Ezekiel stepped between badge and door. "You fire this night," he told Cain. "You turn a test into a war." Cain's thumb worried the hammer, then eased off. "We'll let sunrise do the hanging." The marshals settled, but their eyes stayed hungry. Yet, inside, Ayana rewrapped Itel's bandage with hands that made gentleness look like power. "If Chief weighs politics more than truth," she said, "we go with him, not with fear." "You'd surrender?" Ezekiel asked. "We would choose the trial we trust," Ayana said. "Our law cuts clean or not at all." Ezekiel tasted the ash of helplessness, the flavor of losing cattle, losing Elizabeth, losing the ground 1 inch at a time. He could not lose this. Not after the creek, not after tonight. "What if your father is forced?" he asked. Ayana's mouth tilted. "Then we force him to remember who he is." "Hooves," whispered from the north again, the Apache sentries' cycling watch, respectful as shadows. One rider broke off and called in their tongue. Ayana answered, voice low, words shaped like flint striking steel. Ezekiel caught only one, Riverman. He felt heat rise at the name they had made for him. He had wanted no title. Still, the land kept giving him one. Brother, shield, Riverman. Each word was a door that opened and would not close. Itel woke, eyes clear at last. Storm gone, she murmured, but flood remain. You can stand? For a father, she said, I can do more than stand. Ezekiel stoked the fire. Then Saturday. Tell me the truth. The writers won't, he said softly. About Morrison. Ayanna's jaw worked once. Then she told it plain, the rancher who traded sugar for silence, who drank courage from a bottle and called it peace, who reached for Itel in a barn that smelled of hay and fear. Itel broke his wrist, and the horse's stall broke the rest. We did not flee guilt. Ayanna finished. We fled a lie that rides faster than truth. Ezekiel felt the rope memory again, and for the first time he saw it for what it was. Not justice's tool, but fear's shortcut. Then at dawn he said, we hold the ground. Ayanna's hand found his. The grip was a promise that did not ask to be named. Outside, coyotes stitched the hills back together. Somewhere, Cain rehearsed the sound of victory. Dawn gathered behind the far mesas, pale as blades being pulled from a sheath. Ayanna straightened, a tower seeing over men's inventions. When my father arrived, she said, remember the one thing federal papers forget. What's that? That mercy is a law, too. Morning's blade slid over the horizon, cutting night in two. Cain lined his marshals like a firing squad awaiting cue. Ezekiel stood in the doorway, necklace biting his skin, Ayanna and Itel flanking him like pillars carved by storm. The riders appeared as promised Chief Nailish, with 5 elders, faces painted for ceremony. He dismounted, every motion deliberate, the desert bowing in silence. His eyes found Cain first. You claim my daughters as prisoners. You claim this man a criminal. But treaty binds you to our law when our blood is judged. Cain's jaw set. They killed Morrison. Nailish's voice was iron wrapped in calm. Morrison tried to take what was not his. My daughters defended their honor. Our law absolves them. Your treaty recognizes it. The elders murmured assent. Cain blustered, but the treaty's ink weighed heavier than his badge. Nailish turned to Ezekiel. 3 debts now, coiled together. 1 daughter by water, 2 by storm. This is more than debt. It is bond. Last night I named you son. Today I weigh if you remain so or something else. The yard froze. Ayanna stepped forward, eyes locked to her father's. Chief, I speak plain. My heart does not see brother. It sees man. Cain's rifle lifted, confusion breaking discipline. Nailish's hand silenced both sides. He studied Ezekiel with the patience of stone. Brotherhood can be loosed by word of chief, if family consents. His gaze slid to Itel. Itel, towering despite pain, nodded once. I release him. He has earned his path. The chief's voice cut like flint. Then adoption ends. If he wills, he becomes not son but husband. Ayanna's choice decides. The world tilted. Ezekiel felt the desert hold its breath. Ayanna faced him, warrior's jaw softening to something rare. You chose mercy when death was easier. You stood when fear was cheaper. I choose you. The marshals gaped, law splintered by ceremony older than their republic. Nailish placed Ezekiel's hand into Ayanna's, sealing bond with both Apache tradition and treaty. Cain could do nothing but grind his teeth at defeat. Thus the twist came clear. What began as a rescue at dawn had turned into a marriage at sunrise, a frontier reshaped not by bullets but by vows. The wedding rose like heat off stone plain rings, old words, a circle of elders, and Cain's grudging silence hammered into order by treaty. Ayanna stood in garments stitched with rivers of beadwork. Ezekiel, in his one good coat, dusted with the same dawn that lit her hair. When Nailish bound their hands in a strip of doskin, the yard changed shape. Not a battleground now, but a boundary stone, where 2 laws touched and did not break. Days after, they worked, not as myth, but as husband, wife, sister, and neighbors, learning how to breathe the same weather. The ranch turned trading post, corn for iron, calico for sinew, horses for salt and flour, each barter written in Ezra's hand and witnessed by Itel's stern nod. Settlers came wary and left astonished, pockets lighter, tempers lighter still. Ayana built like a storm, builds deliberate, patient, unstoppable. She raised beams 2 men could not budge, lashed roofs against the tantrums of spring, learned the creak of every hinge and the complaint of every nail. Ezekiel learned her strength as language. Few words, clean choices, a laugh that arrived like rain on hot dust and left the ground smelling new. Itel healed into motion. She trained the mules, appraised hides, taught Ezekiel to read weather. By the way, ravens argued at noon. She drew a line across the yard and drilled boys, settlers, sons, and Apache cousins in how to plant feet and respect a knife before they ever held one. Discipline, she said, is a kind of kindness. Cain returned twice with papers and questions, and both times left with nothing but the taste of lawful defeat. Washington men wrote letters that looked like thunderheads but passed without storm. The treaty held, trade thickened, and rumor traveled wider than trails. The post where a giant bride kept fairness like a ledger, where her sister's shadow ended arguments before they began, where a white rancher learned to listen, and a chief learned to trust a fence line drawn with consent. At night, the lantern made a small sun on their table. Ayana's hands, scarred and deft, mended Ezekiel's shirt. His fingers, clumsy but willing, braided her loosened hair. Across that bright circle, plans grew ribs. A school tent before winter. A doctor summoned monthly, a well dug deeper than fear. They argued like weather brief, honest, cooling fast. About price, about promises, about which danger to court and which to refuse. When the talk ran hot, Ayana would open the door and let the desert settle them. Hear that? She'd say. Silence says nothing is owed to pride. By harvest, the new roof shone like a shield. The cattle, once ghosts on their feet, grew heavy on alfalfa, coaxed from stingy soil. Children raced the length of the porch. Elders traded stories for coffee and time. Somewhere in the turning of those ordinary days, the rote memory in Ezekiel's mind frayed and fell away. The frontier's old sentence, hang or harden, was not the only grammar after all. One evening, Ayana set her palm on the doorpost she had raised. We built with mercy, she said. Now we must learn to defend it. By winter, the ranch was no longer only Ezekiel's. It had become a borderland sanctuary stitched from cedar and covenant. Apache families came with corn and hides. Settlers brought salt, nails, and suspicion. The sisters' presence bent suspicion toward awe. No man quarreled long under Ayana's stare. No boy mocked under Itel's tutelage. One night a wagon limped in, wheels split, oxen gaunt. The settler inside spat the word Apache like venom. Ezekiel expected steel to flash, but Ayana only offered water and bread. By morning, the man's child laughed at Itel's long stride, and his wife pressed coins into Ezekiel's palm. For fairness, she said. Prejudice had found no purchase. Yet danger grew. Cain sent word. Washington eyed the trading post with unease. They fear peace, Nalish said on a rare visit. It robs them of excuses for war. Ezekiel felt the chill of truth. Men in offices preferred enemies they could name to neighbors they must respect. Ayana did not flinch. She spoke at gatherings, her voice a canyon echo. Strength is not to conquer but to guard. Itel taught boys the same lesson with wooden spears and laughter. Ezekiel managed ledgers, translating numbers into bridges. Each night, the three of them sat in the lantern's glow, shoulders near, silence thick with gratitude. They never spoke. Still, Ezekiel wrestled with identity. Brother no longer, husband by choice. He wondered where his blood fit among beads and feathers. One evening he asked Nalish outright, "Am I son, son-in-law, or guest?" The chief studied him. "You are tree in two soils. Roots must learn to drink both, or you will starve." That winter brought storms. Roof beams held under Ayana's lashings. Wells stayed sweet under Itel's guard. Settlers whispered that Riverman's land never failed. not knowing the true engines were two giant women who bore storms on their shoulders. But Cain returned at thaw with writs stamped in territorial ink. He read them aloud before the porch. Federal inspection, questions of loyalty, suspicions of harboring criminals still under review. His eyes found Ezekiel. You may be son by beads, Marsh, but by law you're still mine to hang. Ayanna's hand closed around Ezekiel's. Law comes in many languages, she told Cain. Only some are written, others are lived. Cain hesitated, surrounded by children watching, settlers trading in peace, warriors standing calm. The writ trembled in his hand. He left without firing a shot, but Ezekiel knew the storm would return. Still, that night, Ayanna leaned her head against his shoulder, and the weight was greater than any necklace or treaty. It was the weight of a life shared, of a world being remade, plank by plank. Spring arrived with a rumor of drought, and still the post held. Ezekiel and Ayanna dug the well deeper, ringed it with stone, then wrote a rule on a plank over the bucket. Water is for thirst first. No one argued. When cattle bellowed at noon, Itel rationed with a general's calm, paying children in dried apples to carry pails to the oldest and the weak. In June, the governor's men finally came, dust-bright and certain. Cain rode at their flank, mouth set for victory. They found no war paint, no stolen goods, only ledgers tight as drumheads, fair prices, and quarrels that ended with handshakes beneath the porch bell. Ayanna met the officials at the fence she had raised. She spoke of treaties as if they were fences too, useless if never mended, dangerous if built to wound. Ezekiel walked them through the storehouse, grain counted and tagged in both tongues. Itel staged a drill in the yard, boys of two worlds learning to plant their feet instead of their knives. The visitors took notes. That night, lightning marched over the mesas without rain. Cain lingered in the lantern light, hat in his hands. I did not expect to see this, he admitted. Law doing what bullets couldn't. Law did not do it alone, Ezekiel said. Loss taught me. Courage taught them. We held the line until paper caught up. Cain studied Ayanna's silhouette in the doorway. Storm's not over, he warned. No, Ayanna answered, but we've learned to roof together. A brush fire came snarling over the hills at dusk, the wind shoving sparks like a gambler throws bones. Ayanna and Ezekiel cut a black line with shovels and wet sacks while Itel drove the herd past the creek with a willow switch and a battlefield bark that scattered panic like quail. The line held. The night breathed again. By harvest, the school tent rose, canvas, chalkboard, a borrowed Bible, and a slate of words in two alphabets. A sign over the flap in Ezekiel's square hand read, "Learn or perish." Under it, Ayanna added a second line in her script, which she translated for settlers. To learn is to live twice. The children repeated both like a pledge. On the first cold night, Nalish returned. He walked the yard in silence, then smiled like weather easing. You have built a hearth wider than fear, he said. He blessed their door with sage, blessed the well with cedar, and slipped a single feather into the ledger, remembrance, thin and strong. Later, by the coals, Ezekiel pressed his forehead to Ayanna's and felt the hum of a house that had learned his name. He no longer measured himself by the rope that might have been, but by the hands he could hold and the water he could race. The frontier had taught him one lesson, and he finally believed it. Strength, that is, not mercy, is only another word for drought. Together, they chose work over wrath, building a bridge firm. The prairie keeps its own gospel, written not in ink but in storms endured. Ezekiel learned that gospel kneeling beside giants who bled on his floor, lifting them, though the world called it treason. In their shadows, he discovered what the frontier tried to bury, that mercy is heavier than muscle, and courage is not the absence of fear but the will to choose despite it. Ayanna taught him that strength without tenderness is drought, and tenderness without strength is flood. Itel showed him that defiance, when married to truth, can carry a woman taller than any scaffold. And Chief Nalish proved that law, when bent by wisdom, can become a bridge instead of a blade. The marriage that rose from ash and rumor was no romance of convenience. It was a covenant that dared to tell two warring worlds, Here is ground we share, and it will not be salted. The trading post became symbol, the necklace became legend, and Ezekiel, once a poor rancher waiting for death in dust, became riverman, a name born not of conquest, but of carrying another across. The tale whispers that every frontier, whether carved in desert or in the marrow of the soul, waits for one question to be answered. Will you choose the easier cruelty or the harder kindness? The answer, Ezekiel proved, is the only inheritance worth leaving.